The human brain is capable of incredible things, but it is also extremely flawed at times. Science has shown that we tend to make all sorts of mental mistakes called cognitive biases that can affect both our thinking and our actions. These biases can lead to our extrapolating information from the wrong sources, seeking to confirm existing beliefs, or failing to remember events the way they actually happened. Now, this is all part of being human. Nevertheless, cognitive biases can have a profound effect on our endeavors, our relationships, investments, and life in general. Humans tend to think in certain ways that can lead to systematic deviations from making rational judgments. These arise from information processing shortcuts, the limited processing ability of the brain, emotional and moral motivations, distortions in storing and retrieving memories, and social influences. Cognitive biases have been studied for decades by academics in fields of cognitive science, social psychology, and behavioral economics. But they are especially relevant in today's information-packed world. They influence the way we think and act, and such irrational mental shortcuts can lead to all kinds of problems in all areas of life. There's too much information available. There's not enough meaning. We have this incredible need to act fast. With all this information, how do we decide what to remember? Cognitive biases are just tools, useful in the right context, harmful in other. We might as well get familiar with them and even appreciate that we at least have some ability to process the universe with our mysterious brains. A cognitive bias is an error in cognition that arises when a person's line of reasoning when making a decision is flawed by personal beliefs. Cognitive errors play a major role in behavioral finance theory and are studied by investors and academics alike. A cognitive bias refers to a systematic error in the thinking process. Such biases are often connected to a heuristic, which is essentially a mental shortcut. Heuristics allow one to make an inference without extensive deliberation and/or reflective judgment, given that they are essentially schemas for such solutions. Cognitive Bias Codex lists 188 known cognitive biases. However, I would like to take a look at the 11 most common biases that affect how we make everyday decisions. This awareness will help you shift and understand more consciously why you do the things you do and if you want to continue doing them in the same way. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Experts are often aware of what they do not know and hopefully engage their intellectual honesty and humility in this fashion. In this sense, the more you know, the less confident you're likely to be, not out of lacking knowledge, but due to caution. On the other hand, if you know only a little about something, you see it simplistically, biasing you to believe that the concept is easier to comprehend than it may actually be. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. It is related to the cognitive bias of illusory superiority, and it comes from the inability of people to recognize their lack of ability. Confirmation bias. We all favor ideas that confirm our existing beliefs and what we think we know. Likewise, when we conduct research, we all suffer from trying to find sources that justify what we believe about the subject. This bias brings to light the importance of playing devil's advocate, engaging into critical thinking. That is, we must overcome confirmation bias and consider both sides, or if there are more than two, all sides of the story. Remember, we are cognitively lazy. We don't like changing our knowledge structures and how we think about things. Self-serving bias. Have you ever failed an exam because your teacher hates you? Ever go in the following week and you ace the next one because you studied extra hard despite that teacher? Congratulations, you've engaged the self-serving bias. We attribute success and positive outcomes to our doing, basking in our own glory when things go right. But when we face failure and negative outcomes, we tend to attribute these events to other people or contextual factors outside ourselves. The curse of knowledge and hindsight bias. Similar in ways to the availability heuristic, and to some extent to the false consensus effect. Once you truly understand a new piece of information, that piece of information is now available to you and often becomes seemingly obvious. It might be easy to forget that there was ever even a time where you did not know this information, and so you assume that others, like yourself, also know this information, the curse of knowledge. However, it is often an unfair assumption that others share the same knowledge. The hindsight bias is similar to the curse of knowledge bias in that once we have information about the event, we then think it was obvious that it is going to happen all along. I should have seen it coming. Optimism-Pessimism Bias. As you probably guessed from the name, we have the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of a positive outcome, particularly if we are in good humor, and to overestimate the likelihood of a negative outcome, especially if we are feeling down and having a pessimistic attitude. In either the case of optimism or pessimism, be aware that emotions can make thinking irrational. If you cannot leave emotions at the door, be ready to learn about them, from them, and grow your emotional intelligence. The sunk cost fallacy. Though labeled a fallacy, sunk cost is in tune with bias as faulty thinking, given the manner in which we think in terms of winning, losing, and breaking even. For example, we generally believe that when we put something in, we should get something out, whether it's effort, time, or money. With that, sometimes we lose, and that's it. We get nothing in return. A sunk cost refers to something lost that cannot be recovered. Our aversion to losing makes us irrationally cling to the idea of regaining, even though it has already been lost. Known in gambling as chasing the pot. When you make a bet and chase after it, perhaps making another bet to recoup the original bet, and even more. And even though rationally we should consider the initial bet as out and out lost, the appropriate advice of cutting your losses is applicable here. Negativity bias is not totally separate from pessimism bias, but it is subtly and importantly distinct. In fact, it works according to similar mechanics as the sunk cost fallacy, in that it reflects our profound aversion to losing. We like to win, but we hate to lose even more. So when we make a decision, we generally think in terms of outcomes, either positive or negative. The bias comes into play when we irrationally weigh the potential for a negative outcome as more important than that of a positive outcome. Even when of equal intensity, things of a more negative nature, unpleasant thoughts, emotions, or social interactions, traumatic events, have a greater effect on one's psychological state and processes than neutral or positive things. In other words, something very positive will generally have less of an impact on a person's behavior and cognition than something equally emotional but negative. The decline bias or declinism. You may have heard the complaint that the internet will be the downfall of information dissemination, but Socrates reportedly said the same thing about the written word. Declinism refers to a bias in favor of the past, over and above how things are going. Similarly, you might know a member of an older generation who prefaces grievances with, well, back in my day, before following up with how things are simply getting worse. The decline bias may result from a simple fact. Even though change is the only constant, we still don't like change. Our world is easier to engage when things make sense to us. When things change, so must the way in which we think about them. And because we are cognitively lazy, we try our best to avoid changing our thought processes. The backfire effect. The backfire effect refers to the strengthening of a belief even after it has been challenged. Cook and Lewandowski in 2011 explain it really well. The backfire effect may work based on the same foundation as declinism in that we do not like change. It is also similar to negativity bias in that we wish to avoid losing and other negative outcomes. One's idea has been challenged or rejected, perceived as to be wrong. Thus, we may hold on even tighter to the idea than we have before. The fundamental attribution error is very similar to self-serving bias in that we look for contextual excuses for our failures, but generally blame other people or their characteristics for their failures. It also may stem from the availability heuristic in that we make judgments based only on the information we have available at hand. Imagine you're driving behind a car. The other driver is swerving, slowing down, speeding up. You decide to overtake them so as not to longer be stuck behind such a dangerous driver, and as you look over and you see a female behind the wheel, a fundamental attribution error kicks in when you make the judgment that the driving is poor because the woman is driving, also tying into an unfounded stereotype. In-group bias. As we have seen, through consideration of the self-serving bias and the fundamental attribution error, we have a tendency to be relatively kind when making judgments about ourselves. Simply, in-group bias refers to the unfair favoring of someone from one's own group. You might think that you are unbiased, impartial, and fair, but we also succumb to this bias. We evolved to be this way. That is, from an evolutionary perspective, this bias can be considered as an advantage, favoring and protecting those similar to you, particularly with respect to kinship and the promotion of one's own line. Can we finally accept a very simple idea about groups? We are all truly one group, and that group is called the human race. Now, as I said, these are all most commonly engaged biases with respect to everyday decision making. There's a list of 188 of them, so please do remember. The way you make an unknown number of decisions every day, some are more important than others. Make sure that the ones that do matter are not made based on bias, but rather on reflective judgment and critical thinking.